The Earth is home to many different types of people, and in this series we'll look at each one, what inspired them, who they are, and how they live. If you're caught up with The Otherplace, you'll have noticed a shift in the people who live in the world at the start of Season 2. Probably because I called it out a few episodes in at the start of the season. The game session that comprises the 3rd through 5th episodes of Season 2 was recorded a few months after the first 2 episodes. In those months I've fleshed the world out more, and tried to figure out what the show would look like in a post-pandemic world. Things changed from being a traditional fantasy world with just a few homebrewed elements to a fully invented world where everything was either unique, like the Deuren or the Grænkers, or based on more historical versions of those modern fantasy elements, which you'll hear about when I talk about the Dvergar and the Thers. My goal in stepping away from the Tolkien-esque fantasy was to remove the tropes of the races, in particular, those based on racist or prejudiced ideas. Out with the ageless and aloof elves and the brutish orcs, the two-dimensional dwarves and greedy goblins, and societies who live out their existences completely isolated from one another. In with the Isian, the stone folk, the Woder, and the Hylia, who all generally just behave like normal people and live together across the continent. Most of the people of Fenrayne evolved around the same time. I'll note a few exceptions in upcoming episodes. Similar to our world, certain species grow and change over time, and new species are born. Humans took the path of evolution from apes, Kelpies probably evolved from snapping turtles, and Hylia from fungi. The main difference between our evolution and evolution in Fenrayne is that Fenrayne has magic. It would seem likely that magic has something to do with the creation of the stone folk. And if magic had something to do with the stone folk, that means magic affected the evolution of Dvergar too, since, as you'll find out, the two people are likely related. Did magic speed the evolution of anyone else? Did it fork a path to the left when nature would have taken it to the right? These are questions I probably won't answer, but it's important to note the role of magic in creating a world with so many varied people. So before I get started, here's some general info. The average lifespan of a being who lives in Fenrayne is about 74 years. Deuren are the longest lived, with an average lifespan topping 100 years. Raccoons are the shortest, at about 45. There are a few outliers here, like stone folk, who people don't really have accurate records on, and we'll cover some special cases as we go forward. Every type of person pretty much lives everywhere. As we learn about each type of person living in the world, I'll mention where they can be found most often, but for the most part, time, accessible resources, and easy travel has allowed all species to travel to every corner of Fenrayne. The name Conara comes from the Spanish word for rabbit, conejo. With the Isians, Conara were one of the first non-traditional fantasy species added to the world. Inspiration for them came from all over the place, but of note are the delightfully dark illustrations of murderous bunnies found in the margins of medieval manuscripts. These rabbit-like people are covered in a coat of short hair that ranges from white to black and tan to brown. Some wear their long ears down, others tie them up while they're working. They are herbivores and only kill when defending themselves and their family. Most quail at the sight of blood, but that doesn't mean some Conara don't revel in it. Conara originally came from the Giants' Plains, where they lived a nomadic lifestyle. They traditionally lived in large family groups, where each individual worked equally for the good of the clan. But Conara lived to wander, and you'll find them in most towns and cities across the country selling their wares and singing their songs. Conara are very common across the north of Fenrayne and throughout the country of Guildland. Wandering is a way of life for Conara, and some people take advantage of that. Hopco, or Hoptala's Overland Parcel Company, is well known across Guildland and into Hearth for their speedy delivery and reliable service. Rivaling only the Isian-run Aspen International Response Service, Hopco sees Conara traveling up and down the main roads of Guildland, delivering messages and packages for merchants, politicians, and even the Iron Tower. Conara have their own unique traditions surrounding death and dying. Each Conara family has an appointed conductor. Conductors are responsible for protecting their family members on their journey to and through death. Using magic and instruments passed down through the generations, conductors enter death and make sure the spirits they conduct traverse the rivers safely. The role of conductor is usually passed down every other generation to the youngest Conara in the family. These young Conara are taught the spells of the pyre, spells to calm the 7 rivers, and all the songs and ceremonies to go along with them. From a young age, they're walking in the rivers of death. Conductors are not looked kindly upon by the Fellowship of the 7 Rivers, who view them as nothing more than lesser saints. Using the toolkit of the necromancer, the instruments and spells that a conductor has sworn to use and eventually teach, is against everything the Fellowship stands for. One Conara conductor of note, ex-conductor, was the necromancer Remmel. In his lifetime, he made pacts with a group of powerful dead things known as Maraids. The deal was that he would assist them in crossing over from the 7 rivers into Fenrayne in exchange for loyalty. He helped them cross unbound, and, needless to say, things did not end up going well for Remmel, though he had a few good years of causing terror and mayhem across Guildland before his ultimate betrayal and demise. Remmel's Maraids became the stuff of legend, and people still talk about the Demon of Greenfield and the Bone King to this day. In many old languages, like Old Norse, High German, and Old Saxon, deer, spelled D-J-U-R, or D-I-E-R, actually just meant animal. Over time, those words evolved to be more specific. It's from those old words that the name for Deuren derived. The original intent for the Deuren was for them to be deer-like people, but they've evolved beyond that since. Let's take a closer look at the Deuren and see what makes them unique among the people of Fenrayne. The Deuren have a saying: if you stay in one place too long, you'll put down roots. Deuren are neither plant nor animal, but something in between. They walk and talk like you and I, they eat food, but they also get their energy from the environment. Their woody skin is rough and thick and ranges from white to ochre to umber. They grow small leaves on their heads and tend to have branches that others describe as antler-like. Deuren may be more related to Hylia than any other people in Fenrayne. Appearances vary widely among Deuren. Some look more like humans, Hylia, or Thers. Others look more like trees. Some have smoother bark and smaller branches, and others may be covered with moss or have a symbiotic relationship with polypores. Deuren are most often found in the eastern half of Guildland, and haven't traveled far from that part of the continent. They're fond of the forests and spend a lot of time there, and in the cities and towns still surrounded by woods. While Deuren don't spend all their time with other Deuren, they do like being part of a herd and make fast friendships with people of all sorts. Deuren are well known around Guildland as being great storytellers, and storytelling is a large part of their culture. Young Deuren travel the countryside collecting stories and learning about their fellow travelers as they go. Once the Deuren has collected their fair share of tales, they delve into the deepest parts of the Fellwood to seek out the Bosquenna. The Bosquenna is a Deuren so ancient that they're nearly indistinguishable from the forest around them. The old stories say that the Bosquenna traveled the world, learning from its people and listening to their tales. The Bosquenna had heard stories of every type from people all over the world, and wasn't getting many new ones. But one night, while sitting beneath a lone maple in the north of Guildland, they heard a brand new story. It was a story of time and patience, of growth and change, a story of the seasons. The maple story was new, and the Bosquenna knew what they needed to do next. They made their way to the Fellwood, which was barely half the forest we know it to be today, and set out for the middle of it. There, they put down roots which entwined with all the other trees in the wood. Now the Bosquenna knows all the trees' stories, and the trees know all of theirs. Many young Deuren seek out the great storyteller as a rite of passage. Most leave the Fellwood having told their stories only to the trees, but those lucky enough to find the Bosquenna share their stories, and some decide to put down roots and learn the longer, more patient stories of the trees around them. Dvergar is almost one-to-one the Old Norse word for dwarf. Back in Season 1, when Fenrayne was more of a general fantasy world, there were obviously dwarves. As the world changed and evolved, so did the way I wanted these people to be perceived. About a year ago, I read Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology. In these stories, dwarves are not particularly different than other beings like elves and humans, and they definitely aren't described as short. They do like to make things, though, and not only mechanical or forged objects, but foods, too. And some stories even talk about them guarding doorways to other worlds. Scholars theorize that Dvergar and stonefolk share a common ancestor somewhere in ancient times. It's not uncommon to see, in a Dvergar workshop, men and women pounding metal with their bare fists, or pulling glowing hot porcelain from the kiln, barehanded. Their skin is as hard as tungsten, and may as well be stone. Many Dvergar are creators of fine things, inventors, and traders that travel to the corners of the earth to sell their wares. Their sensitive eyes make intricate work on light materials their specialty. They use clockwork and powerful lodestones as a conduit, harvesting them from hidden mines deep within the spine to power their machines. Dvergar can be found throughout the center of Fenrayne. Many call Hearth, High Reach, and Guildland their homes, but others have enjoyed a life of travel, and now live across the continent. They originally come from the country of Hearth, and the capital city has become known for its Dvergar workshops. For the Dvergar, inventing is not a cultural expectation, but a natural inclination based on their great intelligence and their highly adapted physical traits. While many Dvergar do go on to lives filled with metal, machinery, and hot forges, some find their fulfillment elsewhere. Their natural inclination for detailed work leads some Dvergar into the arts, creating detailed paintings in encaustic or oil, or beautiful sculptures of ceramic and stone. Others head north to the colleges at High Reach, where they use their sensitive eyes to study the cosmos, or look within their own biology and that of others. Dvergar are below average in height, but not minuscule. Their skin ranges from silver and gold to bronze and copper, and their blood runs molten. They have very sensitive eyes that can see detail like no other people in Fenrayne. With skin made of metal, the Dvergar obviously don't grow hair. But these days, a new fashion trend is making the rounds: decorative facial hair. Dvergar of all ages and genders are now sporting custom mustaches as a sign of style and class. The Græntfolk of Fenrayne were originally pretty different. When I was playing around with having reptilian people in the world, the original name that stuck was Triassian. That original name was derived from the Triassic period of history, and the people themselves were bipedal, human-shaped lizards. But that's been done before, and I wanted things to be a little different. Triassians went out the window. The name Græntfolk is easy to take apart. Grant is green. Folk is people. Millennia ago, Græntfolk roamed the plains out west in large herds. These days, they've adapted to city life, and will mostly be found across the south of Fenrayne, from Brightport to Greenfield. While they've adapted to life in cities and towns, many hold to their old traditions. Græntfolk are a large reptilian people. Including their tail, they're typically at least twice as long as the average being is tall. They walk on sturdy back legs and have shorter arms that are up to delicate tasks. A long tail helps with balance, and they can be quite fast when they need to be. Their scales usually range in the greens and browns, though some have brighter blue and yellow hues. Many Græntfolk have colorful feathers on different parts of their bodies, and all Græntfolk have a crest. Unlike the Kilpie, Græntfolk are cold-blooded. This means you're less likely to run into Græntfolk up north, and when you do, you'll find them bundled against the elements, sometimes to a comical degree. A Græntfolk's crest is their pride. When the Græntfolk were wanderers, the crest signified who their people were. Traditionally, Græntfolk paint their crests with the colors of their herd, and surround it with a crown of grasses and wildflowers. These days, they've become a little more liberal with how they adorn their crests, many using paint, metal, and bone. Every 7 years, the Græntfolk have something they call the Antahautis. This festival of life and death takes place in the plains south of the Scorched Sands. Græntfolk come from far and wide to participate in days of song, costume, and tradition. Masked Græntfolk dance en masse in the fields. some said to be possessed by spirits of those long past. They trample the grains and grasses in larger and larger circles for 7 days straight, while others celebrate with traditional food and drink. As the sun sets each night, harmless wisps rise from the earth and drift into the night sky. Though others are invited to the festival, most don't know quite what is happening, and the Græntfolk have trouble describing it in common language. I hope you enjoyed this short journey into the world of Fenrayne. We'll see you next time for more about the world and the people in it. If you're interested in our world, be sure to check out the Otherplace podcast. Each season we follow a new group of adventurers as they journey across Fenrayne, uncovering mysteries and trying to save the world from the encroaching darkness. You can find the Otherplace wherever you get your podcasts. The Fenrayne Files is a production of Nightcast Creative. To learn more about us and the podcasts we make, visit nightcastcreative.com.